In the state's manual for districts on how they track special ed costs and what they need to submit to the department, there's actually two worksheets I can provide copies of these on calculating special ed aid, and I found it very interesting. So in the present formula, with the state paying 3.5 times, or paying when it's over 3.5 times. So there's an example here. On this example, the estimated state average expenditure per pupil at this time was just under $20,000.
What was that?
I can't answer that at this point. But it's the current manual that
That's
they're
me.
using.
Oh,
It's just that this is
The silent thing I did.
So if you multiply that times 20,000 times 3.5, I'm sorry, 20,000 times 3.5, comes out to just under $70,000. That's the special education aid cap. If that was that student's cost. So these are too many numbers to say verbally. To put it more concise, when you go through the rest of the worksheet, for this particular student, the district responsibility comes out to be $69,000. The state is paying much less than that. So the state is not paying anywhere near the full cost of special ed. And wherever the student goes, if they're using services out of district, like apparently almost every district, actually the student go to Spalding, where they get more intensive education, then the sending district pays for that. Resources. I support this bill because I think it would be much more equitable for whether you are an affluent town or not as well-funded town. Special ed doesn't have any boundaries. It makes it very difficult for schools to manage. Well,
1.5%.
it's not percent.
I mean, what have times?
Frankly, the 3.5 times is arbitrary, and to some degree, so is the 1.5. But it is essentially to get the state to pay more of the full cost. To be quite frank, in the ideal world, I think they pay all.
Okay. Well, one of the issues that we're dealing with, of course, there'll be no appropriation for this. The budget we've already completed. So, hello. Hey, you found your one. Was lunch good?
Hey, do you?
Would you please?
Yeah. I'm being late, but here.
That's it's good to see you.
Did you get my message?
Yeah, I did.
Thank you.
I'm trying to read our rules here on this.
So, just to carry a little further, one of the other things that we should know is right now in the funding formula, the way it currently exists, the state pays $2,300 in a differentiated fee for students with special ed. So we're acknowledging that it is part of advocacy that they should pay for special ed, but they're not paying anywhere near the cost. It's not that the state doesn't recognize special ed as part of advocacy. It really happens.
Okay, Mel, what we're doing is, in for our wandering rep from Conway, Uh,
Yes, sir.
We were looking at 577, and if you recall, that dropped it from 3.5 to, it's the special ed
They
aid.
actually reviewed all the notes last night.
Okay, so you know where we are. Just as a side note, I did have communication from Representative Heath that she's putting in legislation for the formation of a commission that would be also funded up to $150,000 for support to look at the entire package of funding this area of special education, along with the differentiated aid component amount. And trying to come up, because she sees it the same way I do, is that we've had this issue come before us so many times before. And there's a number of issues, like we're talking about spreadsheets just now. What would it cost if we dropped it from 3.5 to 1.5 or to 2.5? And what would be the implications for how much we have to appropriate from the state? We don't have that information. And when I've talked to Caitlin in the past, she said it'd be more expensive, of course, for the state in the CAD aid, but you're splitting that money up amongst more kids now because you're reducing from 3.5 times to 1.5 times.
Those kids are being paid for, they're just not being paid for by the state.
They're being paid by local appropriated dollars, yes, and some differentiated aid. Everybody gets differentiated aid if you have an IEP, which is minimal. $2,100, $2,300. So what I'm basically suggesting, because we only have a month, and we're not going to get any dollar appropriation from the finance anyways on this. And I understand, I was trying to look and there's some reference in rules that regarding passing like filing. Well, I thought I'd read somewhere, and I'm trying to find out if it had a fiscal note that was a different issue, and it. Well, it's all local.
So can we approach DOE, require DOE to provide us some numbers? They have the data. They need to make it available to us. They have to have it. They require the school systems to submit it.
Yes.
Yes.
Why don't you come on up?
Thank you.
Hi.
I'm Rebecca Fredette. I'm the State Director of Special Ed. So we did submit a fiscal note on this, and the reason that we said that it was indeterminable is the only data we collect is when the district knows that a student is going to go over cap. So they're not going to put in a kid's expenses that are less than cap because they're not going to get any money from it, and they have to upload into our system in order to be reimbursed. So they'll only put in the invoices for a student if they know that it's going to go up over that cap amount. So we don't collect all the expenses for every student.
Thank you, and welcome. And that's not how I had understood it. So hence my baffled face. But districts have to track all their special ed expenses, correct?
they should be tracking all of their special ed expenses, yes. They may not necessarily track it individually per child. They may say, I paid for a speech language pathologist at this amount for the year, and it was for these 10 kids. I don't know if they necessarily would break it down into each child we spent this much money on, but they do track the expenses overall.
So they could have an average number per special ed student in their district that,
I'm gonna turn
that are
around.
students that have not met
In
the
back.
cap.
Yes, one of the directors in the back said yes.
But that's not provided to DOE.
No, because we wouldn't use that. Currently, we don't use that for anything. So all we would use are the funds that they're requesting from us to pay them for special education aid or court-ordered placements.
So how would we know what the collective we, both local and state, are investing in special ed? Why don't you all come on?
She's not from the DOE, but she is from a school district. We'll just have a party.
It's great with me.
So I don't know this, but I'm wondering if you can get it from the DOE 25 that the districts submit to. Yeah, so you wouldn't have it by student. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Lisa Moody. I'm with the Office of Finance and Data. So I oversee special education aid and court-ordered payments. What's Caitlin's group?
Division of Educational and Analytics and Statistics.
So they get the DOE 25, so they may be able to collect that information, but it would be their special education costs for all students that are in their district, not just one student. But that would give you a total. You'd be able to get a total cost for special education for the state.
Well, that's really what we're looking for. We don't need it. Everybody correct me if you think otherwise. We don't need it per student. We need to know more generally.
No, because it's the state average. We need is the total amount divided by the number of students, right?
We need the number of students, yes.
We need a number of students, not who they are.
Right.
If we're looking at averages.
I believe you had said that you had the average at 32,000.
That's what I was
If we
told
went to one and
yesterday,
a half.
and you guys can certainly amend that.
I think that there's such a disparity in the level of services that are provided. You're providing maybe 2 speech services a week, all the way up to a residential placement with speech and OT and PT and swallow studies, and like there's a huge disparity. So it comes out to $32,000 a year. So that's why I think it's more helpful if you had it individually, because we could say, okay, all of these kids would now qualify, whereas we are saying only these kids qualify for special education aid. But because there's such a range of services, it's hard to say, like, that average isn't going to help us, I don't think.
That's why we need what we had last year where we had the categories. We paid so much per category. Right? Because that would deal with that.
Somewhat, but not completely. I mean, you could have a student who has speech and language services, but they're also identified with autism. They're identified with other health impairment. Every kid is individual, and really those numbers are based on the services that they receive, because it just adds up as you add more services.
Jess Bickford, Assistant Superintendent from SAU 53, the Pembroke area schools. I think something to consider, if you talk about delineating cost per disability area, you run the risk of some discrimination factors in there too. So just caution that. And I can say that, just from thinking of the kids that we have in our own district, we've got a student that may be deaf or visually impaired that is costing 5 times as much as a student who's intellectually impaired. So I think to generalize those categories of disability may be pretty misleading.
We do know there's a number of states with weighted amounts per disability that it's part of their formula. And we've gone through and acquired that information. That's why we did bring forward that bill last year, which did have two categories. It's all we had in there. 3 on one and 10 IEP categories in the other. It passed out of here with a unanimous vote and went on to finance due to the cost. It cost about $15 million more with this, and we weren't really jacking up those costs a whole lot in conjunction with actual costs, what it cost to provide the services for a child that had TBI, or a child that needed orthopedic support, or a child that had a disability, which was significantly more than just the old resource room for 30 minutes a day type thing, or even speech, where it's, you know, a group of 5 kids getting together in second grade and sitting there for 2 times a week at 30 minutes per time, learning their R's or what have you. So we know we can do that. The concern, I think the hardest thing to do, though, is to get a grasp on this the old catastrophic aid category. Because a lot of these kids are coming, some of these kids come in during the course of the year, and you're not even ready for that. And all of a sudden, your small district of 67 kids having 2 pop in on you, like Piermont had, at $250,000 plus per child. You take the formula, and they're still in the ropes for a lot of money, which they don't have a trust fund or something set up in the or a reserve set up for that, like some of the larger districts do have. So in knowing this, this is why Representative Heath and I, and she's putting this in, she's the prime sponsor of this legislation that's been submitted. There's LSR number now for it, to set up a commission to really take a deep dive into how we're funding special education services. There's also an appropriation in that commission bill that she's putting forward for support personnel to help us in that endeavor, which I think is a great idea. Because we know that we're struggling, and if there's any one issue we hear more from school districts, it's that of, how do I pay for my special education costs? It's dragging money from other areas of my budget to support this one. And that's not good. And it's really coming down where I think 91A issue, it's an unfunded mandate that's coming, although we know it's federal, so we can't get away, but the federal part is no longer being funded. 28A, excuse me, 91, that's personal privacy confidential. 28A, excuse me. But yeah, the feds are way below their 40% initial offering. So what's even less than half of that now we're receiving. But we're still required to do IDEA. So I think Mary's got a good idea here. We need to have, in a committee like this, studying for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I don't think we're going to come up with all the information and make a decent decision as we would do it through a commission study. Yeah.
Well, I was last night, and I thought today, I apologize once again for being late. I thought today we're going to have the data from DOE on January 31st, we can retain at the executive session to find about raid costs 1.5, 2.5, up to what we had to deal with. But I have concern about Representative Heath's bill, not for the commission aspect of it, but rather this is kicking this issue down the road. This legislature has, in the past recent history, unfunded expensive items that they did not know the cost. Things that they thought would be $100,000 to $1 million. So they have the capacity and the willingness to help education in their perspective. This is more important, in my belief, for little small towns. You talk about Piedmont, when these catastrophic folks come through the door, their budget's set for the year. They have no option. And I understand the federal mandate about the 40%. We haven't got that. Get down. The state piece. I got all that. But this is a chance where we have to step up and say, you know what? We're trying to help the school district and the youngsters who are in need. And the school district is actually the property taxpayer, which I'm not really concerned about the taxpayer. I'm concerned about the school district as a whole, because they only can work the money they have. And I have concern that today that we're kicking down the road for a commission. Honestly, Rick, that bothers me, and I think I don't know if it was Hope or me or you or or the chair, or the senior Democrat in Melville was supposed to ask DOE, but we said this last January 31st. We're gonna ask for these costs, and they're gonna bring back some recommendations. And I'm concerned, we're sitting here saying, well, we're gonna kick down the road another whole cycle, and maybe the commission might come through.
Well, it is gonna go for another at least 2 years. We are just approved a budget. And we've appropriated X number of dollars for, I don't know what that amount was, 30-something million? 32 million, somewhere around that neighborhood. And that's appropriated. Now we drop it down to 1.5. You're gonna have more kids qualifying for that pot of money, correct?
Absolutely, we don't know.
So it's gonna be distributed, that limited amount of money is no longer gonna be distributed to the ones 3.5 to 10 times. It's gonna be 1.5 upwards.
Yeah.
So it's less money per pupil.
I'm not suggesting, Rick, that we forget this word, Mr. Chair. I'm not suggesting that we diminish the 3.5 to 1.5. I'm suggesting we categorize and allow 1.5 to be the number. And that's the number the state is responsible to find.
But we don't have the money set aside.
This is not the first time we had budget items with money not set aside that the state found in general funds. If this passes, it's their responsibility to find it. Let downstairs, let the corner office, somebody else find it. The money's there. We're talking about revenue. I'm talking about this, I come from a town that's not as small as some of your folks' towns, and it still hits us. But this is a base of a big foundation. And I'm concerned that we just, I've been in 30 years in education, and I've heard every time in New Hampshire, I hear about the catastrophic aid, and every bitches and moans about it. But here's the chance to do something about it, and we were waiting. And I'm concerned honestly, about kicking it down the road again, and maybe just talking out of sorts, but it does bother me. I think we should take some action as we move forward. This is an important piece. This is an important piece for all the small towns in New Hampshire, which there are many, because they can't afford it.
Somewhere in these rules, as the recommendations we can make in this session coming up, passing another money bill, I don't think we're allowed to do that. I'm gonna,
Is there,
Hold on, sure. I mean, there's plenty of bills that have FNs on them that we will see this coming year. So I don't think that's the restriction, but, and I'm sorry I was a few minutes late, but was there was there an amount, a dollar amount that, that's been presented, that sort of sums up what's between 1.5 times the estimate?
DOE did not present any numbers.
And what the total is. What's that?
They just said that they can't give it,
Oh, he wasn't here. They did.
they don't have that information.
Okay, I didn't hear that, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
well,
So,
And that's the
all right,
point.
so we don't have that.
But and they were legitimate why they didn't, because they aren't collecting that data, which makes sense. They don't collect the data, you can't guess. But this is way back, it's nice to know since January 31st that data wasn't collected. We could move to another phase of this. But this is a retained bill, right? It's gonna come back up. And it's a policy bill.
So, not to, put precision over accuracy, but could we get an idea from the department, sort of finger in the wind, what we think the difference is between 1.5 times the average per pupil cost and the full cost of special education, so we can have a better understanding about how much of this is being borne by the local property taxpayer?
So currently, for special education aid, as you said, it's 32 million. We're just over 32 million this year in our calculations, and that's only 700 kids. So if you change that number to 1.5, I would estimate that you're more than tripling that number of students. I can't say how much more, but if you're saying that the cost per pupil is only going to go, your cap is only going to go to 1.5 times, you're including a lot of kids that are in in your schools and are participating and they're receiving services in your schools, which currently they are not participating in the special education aid pot that we provide.
Right.
So I would say that at least 3.5 times more students, probably a lot more than that. I'm going low on my estimate.
Okay, so just to sort of, get an idea, and this is just
Yep.
finger in the wind. So currently we're spending it's $32 million, which are essentially the 20% plus the 10X
Yeah,
group.
yeah,
20% above 3.5 and then 100% above 10X. But 100% above 1.5 times could be in the $250 million ballpark. I mean,
least.
just finger in the wind.
at least, yes. Because you have to think we have 30,000 special education students and we're only covering 750 of them approximately with that special education aid. So it's going to go up drastically because we're going to cover a lot more students. I would say, you would cover a large majority of the students.
Okay.
And
Thank
right
you.
now, their total cost is like 82 million for all students, right? For that qualifies for special education, their total costs come to 82 million.
For the students that would currently qualify
Yeah.
for or where districts are getting some relief through the special education aid. Okay.
Could you just repeat, I'm not sure I got this right or not. So I believe you said special ed aid now is 32 million for just over 700 students. Obviously, those are the ones at 3.5 and above. And you, as Representative Luna said, finger in the wind, think 3.5 times more students than that
At least,
if we change to this formula.
at least, yes.
Would it be correct to understand that those students are less expensive per individual? I
Yes.
mean, we know that.
Yep.
There's just so many variables here. We need numbers.
This goes
How do we get
wider.
numbers?
Unless we were able to get all of the data from each district, but as I said, I don't know if you track it by individual student. Because the only ones they're tracking individually are the ones they know they can get money from us to help them out with their bills. So they would track their special education aid students, they would track their court ordered placement students, but other students, there's, I think, maybe 1 or 2 districts that track all of their kids to determine
I think that's right.
if they can get special education aid for some of their other students. I could be wrong, Jess could speak to that, but I think it would be a harder number to quantify.
I can say that we do not track individual costs for every single student. I have gone through and tracked all of our district's
21
costs as a whole. So I have gone through and said, all right, we have 52 students in this one school that are qualifying for special education. Here are all the related service personnel. Here are all the special educators. And here's how much that total is. Here's the average cost per student for that school. But to break it down, I'd have to go through every single IEP, calculate the hours, calculate the minutes, and then calculate that based on the salaries per individual. So we don't track the individual student costs, but the group as a whole, we do. I do, anyway.
Would you, or that is by you, any of the three of you, would you know how frequently districts do the aggregate accounting that you've just described?
I don't think I could speak to all of them. I know I did it because I was concerned about the cost of our special education programs. So I wanted to know on average how much each building was spending on special education and if there were huge influxes, why. And really it was our out of district costs that spurred those conversations. So it wasn't even like the school-based programming that spurred me to do that. It was the cost that we're spending for our out of district costs. That's what spurred me to do that because I wanted to make sure we weren't overspending in one building and then underspending in another building and what the reason would be for those things. I can tell you that a big portion of our costs are transportation. It's not even direct services that are given to students in special education, it's transportation. One specialized transportation for a student can cost around $85,000, and that's about average.
Is that for a student who's receiving education out of district?
Not necessarily. So if there are barriers to a student to get to school and they have an IEP, we are required by law to transport them to school. So there is a mix. Yes, it is for students who go to out-of-district placements, but it is also for students who attend the local LEA. So yeah.
And
Okay,
Can I-
hold on. I want to read a rule here, Rule 45, that for the House rules here. And it says, reporting of bills, committee reports, retained bills, interim study as a second-year report. Printing of committee reports and amendments, Part 1, are in compliance with this. All bills in the possession committee shall be reported out by the date specified in Rule 66 with one of the following recommendations. We can either recommend ought to pass with amendment, inexpedient to legislate, refer for interim study, or recommend but to pass, recommend but to be laid on the table because of funding. This is a funding bill. So if we recommend go forward, this is going to be put on the table. Basically, it's dead. Or you can interim study it and there'll be a study conducted. But because of the budget already being defined, there will be no additional dollars in the biennium we just passed the budget for. So, we have two options here. One, to study it as this committee right here, or to recommend not to pass, and then it's going to be put on the table. Or we go with Representative Heath's bill, setting up a commission study to really properly look at not just catastrophic aid, so this bill is, but look at the whole thing, differentiated aid. How many kids? About 30,000 special ed kids, $2,100 a piece. That's you're close to $60 million. Plus adding on the $30 million or so, we're up close to $95 million, $100 million for special ed here. It seems reasonable to me that we're not going to be able to get something done in this committee right here. We've studied this bill before, and I never got the data back from when we asked. We tried to drop it down not to 1.5, but to 2.5. We never got the data back then. So I think it needs to step it up a notch from committee to commission and really look at overhauling how we're funding special education in the state of New Hampshire. Yeah.
It's just a clarification on all of it. Hope is one of the co-sponsors, or you as the chair. I thought the intent of this bill, and I may be wrong, but I thought the intent of this bill was to reduce the catastrophic impact, not the standard annual special ed impact on budgets. I thought this was to reduce the times for the catastrophic impact.
But stopping that point right there, if you're a small district like a Piermont, you're hammering them more, because by reducing to 1.5, we've just been told the number of kids qualifying for CAD aid is going to increase. That limited pot of money is going to then be spread over all those kids, and the amount that Piermont would have gotten is going to be less. And they don't have a reserve fund, and they don't have other special ed kids which are going to capture any funding based upon differentiated aid, which is limited amount of money to begin with.
But that's, if I may, isn't that based on the number in the budget right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's assume that there's no number. Let's assume the intent. The intent of the bill, if I understand it correctly, and you're the co-sponsor, I may be wrong, but I thought the intent of the bill was to set a number, 1.5, 2, 2.5, move down to 3.5 times for catastrophic aid, so that districts have a better chance of surviving after their school budget is set, and they have somebody come in. So they aren't waiting for 3.5. It's a 2 number or a 2.5 number. I wasn't talking about.
Well, you can do that if you're going to just set a policy and put an effective date of 2026 or something such as that.
That is something. That's a step forward. This is year 4, and we're still here with the same bill. Rick, this is my point.
But is this the only problem in special ed?
Okay.
In terms of funding? I don't think it is.
So,
But that may not be the only problem with special ed. I would concur with you. However, this is a problem and it's one we can address policy-wise.
So respectfully, I don't think it's either or. We could support this bill with the language you just noted that it can't go into place until funding is appropriated. And we could also support Mary Heath's study commission to look at the whole broad picture. For instance, looking at the reality that the state can, if they don't fund enough, not supply all the Cat aid at whatever formula is being used. They supply whatever percent of it. I think we should do both. I also want to note that it's not quite accurate to think that this is only affecting the small towns, and gosh knows I really want to help the small towns. But actually, it's all the towns. 23% of education funding is special ed. Across the board, Portsmouth is 21%. They're not a little small poor town. It's everywhere. So we've got to help the little towns, but we've got to fix the system.
Yeah, I agree that the system has to be fixed. But do we have command of everything we need to? For example, if it's going to be 3.5, 8.5, whatever, that money's being used to support a residential placement. What do we do in terms of auditing or going out there and evaluating and ensure those IEP goals are being followed at that residential placement, let's say in Massachusetts or in Tennessee?
So the responsibility still remains with that residential LEA. So if the student comes from Pembroke and they go to Tennessee to go to school, it's still the responsibility of where that child resides, which is in Pembroke, to ensure that the goals of the IEP are met.
Yeah, that's great on paper. But, the visitation never happens. Yes, Representative Hall.
Thank you. I'm finding it hard to believe that this data can't be collected, right? I mean, can the DOE ask special ed directors, individual directors to come up with this information? I mean, to sit back and always never know what that number is, an estimate or something, other than what you just gave us, which is not really accurate probably. I mean,
Unless there was
finger in the
something
wind, but-
unless there was something within the language, I have no authority to ask them for that because I'm not using it for anything. I have the authority to ask them when they apply for special education aid because I'm reimbursing them for that. But I don't have the authority to say you need to give me each individual child's costs. There's no language that says that I can ask them for that. And I think it would take them a while to do that. As Jess said, it's not something that she does. You'd have to go, and we do it. This is what we do for special education aid. It takes us from July until December, and we go through every single IEP and every single service and correlate it to every single invoice. There are 4 people, we typically hire 4 people to do this, and that's their job for those 6 months, is to go through and correlate it to, and that's only 700 students.
Follow up? So is this number never going to be known unless it goes into effect, and then we'll find out? Is that,
As
there
I
is
said, I
no
don't
other
have the
way?
authority to ask for it. So unless it went into effect, then I could ask them for it when they applied. I don't have the authority to ask them for that. And I think it would be cost prohibitive to try to get them to do that, to submit to us.
I think the closest thing that is readily available, like was alluded to before, was the DOE 25. So the special education directors across the state every year optionally fill out what we call the special ed cost survey. And so we review our DOE 25, which gives us a whole cost of special education. And we answer a variety of questions that ask number of students, those kind of things. And there's some formulas they put into these questionnaires, and it spits out what our average cost for special education is in each of those districts. The survey is optional. We don't have to fill it out, but there is a mechanism in place to gather some baseline data, but it won't give you per cost per kid. It gives you an average. But there is a survey that exists. I know I have filled it out every year for the last 4 years. So.
And that will go back to the average cost that we have been asked about. We could give you the average cost, but it's not going to give you that high or that low or individual student cost.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Representative Luno.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, just a couple thoughts on the conversation that we've been having here too. I think it probably would, I mean, if a bill like this were to pass, I think, as an alternative to prorating all the payments to districts by a substantial amount, because obviously there's more pupils involved, that the department could go to joint fiscal committee and request additional funding for that grant. So I mean, there are, I think, provisions in state government to where money that was not appropriated during a budget year can be used to handle these new expenses.
That's what they call the black hole in funding.
Well,
The fiscal committee and the number of departments all over the state know they're going to need X number of dollars, but their budget's only funded at this level. They say, oh, don't worry, I'll just go back and say I've spent more than this and I need this.
right.
And whether they get or not.
So I wanted to comment on that, but I also wanted to comment that that if we, I think it would be a loss for the state and a lost opportunity if we were to ITL 577 and not at least use it for a vehicle to require the department to determine what the costs would be above 1x, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, so that we get those breakpoints. And I think we could probably do that as an amendment to this bill, and it's something that would make a study commission even that much more effective, having those numbers available.
You know, I agree with you on that, Representative Luno, that during the month of July and August, we weren't allowed to meet. So here we are in the month of September dealing with this heady issue, which we know was a tough one, and talking about gathering information. You're not going to get it. You're not going to get it in just 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time. We've been asking for teacher shortage. We're trying to get figures on certification. And Steve's lucky to be able to get, the first request he got 20% of the districts to respond. 6 months later, it gotten up to 56%. And that's where it lays. And we had the same thing when it came to the emergency management plans, operation plans. When we were sat in there trying to dole out the $40 million, so 30 point something million dollars, we asked how many have submitted? 20%.
And also, Mr. Chair, I think, if we were to amend this bill to collect that data,
Yeah.
we could put a carrot on it too.
Yeah. Well, you got to have the carrot, and you only,
To compensate the districts and the department for doing the work.
And this is why I think that Representative Heath has money attached to her commission study. That to get the survey data, I wonder how many surveys are sent out monthly or requests for information of these school districts that are understaffed to begin with. And they're sitting trying to process this stuff, and you're understaffed. 80% of the salaries they're paid by federal dollars at DOE. And so, I think that this is a real stretch. It's beyond just normal operating procedure and gathering of data, especially when we send the stuff out and we have folks that are not responding. I get that constantly from Mr. Appleby. I get it constantly from Caitlin Davis. And it takes a number of yanks to try and get the information brought back in. I bet you get the same thing. Things don't come in on a timely basis.
But this bill, if it were amended, could be passed on January 4th, signed shortly there, certainly months in advance of your and Representative Heath's bill.
Yeah, you're not going to.
And have that information available to a commission at the time it starts.
Does this sound like something that if we put
You're
that
wiser
in,
with an interim study and do it. don't study it. That way you can do it now.
As we said, most districts are very short on staff. I think it would be extremely difficult to get from them. Not that they wouldn't want to provide it, knowing that they could get more funding. I just think that it goes back to, we have 4 people do this for 6 months for 700 kids. You're asking the entire state to do it for 30,000 kids in every single IEP. So I just, like, I don't know how long it would take. I don't know if they have the manpower to do it. I think they would understand why you're asking for it, but it's just, that's a huge ask.
Can I just ask, is there any data anywhere perhaps that compares New Hampshire special ed costs with the cost of special ed elsewhere in the country?
I'm sure there is. I could try to find something for you.
I'm not trying to make more work for very
That's
busy
actually
people.
easier because I could just reach out to one of my TA providers and say, do you have average costs of special education across the states?
We could get that through the Education Commission of the state.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would perhaps be worthwhile if there's not a large disparity between states, then maybe it's at least some perspective on what this bill would cost us to look at, how is this happening elsewhere? And I do just want to say I fully support Representative Luno's perspective that if we can figure out some viable way to start getting data for New Hampshire sooner and respecting that you and your staffs do not have time to do that in the schools. You're already trying to do more than enough. But the commission's not, if the commission gets formed, what is it going to work with if it doesn't have any data?
We're gonna get the data. It's a 2-year.
But why wait till then?
The commission uses the year for what you predict.
So who's going, by what authority are we going to gather data? Yeah, you passing law, which is not until next summer.
This one could be quick.
This one, if we pass it as an amendment to this bill, that will go in January 1st. So that's when it started.
It'll go to a second committee.
Right, but it's still ahead of the game. It's still ahead of the game.
I guarantee it won't make it out of that second committee.
Right.
Because this bill has gone to that second committee at 2.5 times, killed immediately.
No, but we're not talking the bill as written here.
Right,
We're talking to collect data.
right.
Collect data.
Yeah,
So-
the bill
Okay.
should be collected.
So we amend this bill to replace the content of the bill with a request to collect the data that would help us determine how to proceed, us or the commission.
And collecting the data shouldn't go to finance,
No, that'd be strictly policy.
right?
Well, there could be an appropriation
Yeah.
on it just to
Just to collect the data.
the department might need a contract.
I'll get the point is,
Representative Dry.
Can I ask you a Mel question? Will we be comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges? Because I got the feeling from you that a school has this much that they have to fulfill and one person fulfills it. But it's hard to divide it up into what portion of their salary is being devoted to that. So we're asking for how much does it cost to do this student, and you're paying for it by it's a part of this and it's a part of this teacher and a part of this aide and a part of this thing. So I'm not sure how to draw those two numbers together, because we're asking for people to do not just math, but to change it and to put it into different form to get it than they're usually used to reporting it.
Personally, that's why I haven't collected the individual student data and I've gone with a district average. So I mean, I could look up and tell you what my average cost per pupil is with identified pupil in each one of my schools. Because I calculated it out.
But that-
Doing just that, but I didn't break it down per hour per kid, because that would be a whole different thing and it isn't necessarily the scope of what I was looking for.
And so the problem is we're trying to look at those kind of numbers by 1.5 times X, but we don't know what X is exactly. Okay.
Right.
Well, I got a question.
Yes.
So the question that I have of listening to all this is when a school district makes a request for reimbursement, do they make a request on a specific, is there a title? Is there a label? How do you know what you're going to be paying for? There's got to be some kind of an invoice or something that says, okay, this student is going to this residential school, it's costing this amount, this is the request. So what are you actually reimbursing?
So so the districts all know about special education aid, and their student has to reach the 3.5 times the estimated cost per pupil. And so that estimated cost per pupil is for the whole state. And when we're talking about the DOE 25, that's where it comes from. And so anything over, so they put all this information into Nessus, and then we have behind the scenes, it formulates it for us. And so our district will upload their invoices, and then we're in our review process now, and we're reviewing all the district's costs to make sure that it's in the IEP and allowable, and then we refund them come January 1st.
But what is a cost?
So they submit costs for the tuition for a residential placement,
Okay.
for transportation, for speech services, for a paraprofessional, for anything like that is going to bring them up over the cap. If they're in, if they go to another school and they may submit for the teacher cost. If they're going to a charter school, sometimes they submit for the teacher cost because you're splitting the cost of that teacher between 5 special education students as you provide services to them. So it's anything that is provided to a child for services, including tuition, is something that's submitted to us. They need to submit the invoices, and then as Lisa said, we take the invoice and then we look at the child's IEP and say, yes, this says that they got speech 3 times a week, and yep, their IEP says they receive speech 3 times a week. Yes, we can reimburse you for that.
And that child has an identification number, correct? So it's not specific to any name. It's just to an ID number, right?
The system does have their names in it, yes.
The system has the names, but from an identification standpoint, you've got the number rather than the name.
We have all of that. Typically what they put on an invoice is a student's SACID number, yes.
Okay, thank you. So if you have Mill Myler has an IEP, and in that IEP, it says, this is what he has to do.
Yeah.
It says, and also says, how much Teacher Luno is spending with that teacher and how much that is cost for that. So you do have that information on an individual, by individual students.
But only for the students that they are submitting for special education aid. So
Right.
if they're not going to submit, if she has a student who she knows is only going to get 2 units of speech each week, she's going to say, nope, they're not going to meet special education aid cap. I'm not even going to put their invoices in. we're just going to pay that cost because I know it's not going to reach cap. So we never see that invoice. I have the IEP, I have the services. I never get an invoice from Jess to say, please pay me for this, because she knows she's not going to reach the cap with that student. So we only get the students that the districts know that they're either going to meet cap or come very close to cap, so that they can ask for reimbursement.
How do you break down the expenses that are separated between HHS and DOE on these residential placements?
So we pay the education portion,
Yes.
and then they pay the residential portion.
Now, what about room and board
If they're placed by DHHS,
if they're placed by DHHS?
yes.
I need to have that explained to me a little. If we have in my district a child that's going to receive a placement in a school that's not in the district for special ed IEP needs and is going to have to be there 24/7, how does that break down in terms of shared costs?
There is no shared cost. If they are not involved with DHHS, is not a shared cost. It is just the cost of the district.
So that's all part of the district.
Yep.
And you do an audit of the accounting practice that, to ensure that they're saying this is going to cost $186,000 per year. How do you ensure that the expenses and what they're submitting to you are associated with the IEP?
So we approve rates for for private providers of special education each year. They submit their budgets to us and their audits to us of the costs that they've put in over the year. So they have a whole form that they fill out that puts in all of the costs that they spent, and then we use that to determine their rate each year.
Yes, Representative Hall?
Thank you. Is there software that you don't own? But is there software that would sort this stuff out? There's gotta be, right? You've never heard of any software?
This is with software. So this is with our New Hampshire Special Education Information System. We call it Nessus.
Right, I'm familiar
And
with that.
so all but 5 districts use Nessus to put their IEPs into that. And then the other 5 districts have to put in a certain number of data points, and they have to put in more information if they're putting in for special education aid. So they have all of the information regarding the child in the system, and then they submit their invoices through the same system.
Yeah.
And the system calculates what their cap is, but then we go back and confirm that, yes, this invoice matches this IEP, and we're actually paying for what we're supposed to pay for. So the system does track it and pull it all in, but then you have to go back and you have to confirm, because sometimes they'll put in for a paraprofessional and it's 5 hours a day, and sometimes the IEP only says 2 hours a day, and we can't pay for that extra 3 hours a day. So we have to go back and correlate the IEP to the invoice.
It just seems like there's got to be something out there that can
This is the
sort
easy
further. I
way.
mean, I've written many IEPs, and I don't know. I just find it hard to believe that there's not a sorting system, but that would cost money that you don't have.
Representative
Thank you.
Woodcock?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question on the current 3.5 times, just ballpark. How many of those youngsters still, percentage-wise, are retained in district versus out of district?
Oh, I have no idea.
I mean, we could look at it, but I don't know. I mean, we could look at the 700 kids and see. I would say that most of them are residential or day placements in an outside facility.
Right.
But I could look at the numbers.
No, I only say that not to put you on the spot, because
Nope.
granted, I was there at the Conestoga wagon, but when I was there, the bulk of the catastrophic costs were youngsters who were placed out of district. So so this
would say it
is,
still remains.
this is, so a small, I'm thinking maybe a small number reach that
Right.
cap in-house.
Yep.
So these are youngsters that are moving on somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Dry?
So if we can't fix things by moving it from 3.5 to 1.5, could we change it by paying 100% of the people that are getting 3.5 instead of 80%? Have the department.
I mean, moving it to 1.5 will help them as well. I mean,
Yeah, but it also opens it up to a lot more people. I'm just saying, if we did it would only affect the ones that are the catastrophic aid right now.
it would still affect the same number of kids, because they all meet cap, and
Okay.
then from cap until 100%, that they pay 20, and then we pay at 100%. And I know I'm not speaking very clearly.
So for example, if we left it at 3.5, so for last year,
Yep.
the total was 80,000. 2 cap was 43,000. So we would be paying them more than the 1,000 million than the 30 million. We'd be paying them 37 million instead of 30 million.
Them being
The district.
the districts. Okay.
Because if we don't have enough, like, what did you say the costs were this year?
80.
87. So if we go over the amount of money we have $32 million. If once everything is all verified and accounted for, if we get to the end and we say all of these costs are $35 million, we then have to prorate it, and the district gets less than the 80% or the 100% over 10 times. So it's all based on the total amount of money that we have.
Wow. Okay. Kind of like planning your school budget ahead of time.
You
Yeah,
have this
thank
much money.
Okay.
Yes.
So, do we have a way now of calculating what the average cost of regular education is?
I would assume so, yes. I could talk to Caitlin and find that out, yes.
Okay, so that
Well, isn't that That's the cap.
That's the estimated cost per pupil.
That's the
Yeah,
estimated cost per pupil.
Of 1,100, the 1,100 group, right?
Yep.
Gee, I can remember that from school board days. So, and then we could also probably calculate an average cost, additional cost for special education
Yep.
based on the 1,200
Yep.
group?
Yep.
Okay. So that we could get without any data collection.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Would that, so 1,100, this is from school board accounting, is regular education, 1,200 is special education, and 1,300 is something else.
So you're asking for the difference between the average cost per pupil for all students and the average cost per pupil for special education students.
Right.
You would want the difference between the two of those.
Yeah,
And we could pull it from the data that's voluntarily submitted on the DOE 25 for special education.
Okay.
And we could pull it from DOE 25 for all students.
no, thanks. And I think that would be helpful to really understand what the, cost to communities are, for special education, which is clearly the right thing to do, providing special education, and is mandated to us under state and federal law. So, and actually the way 577 is written is it talks about the average cost per pupil, 1.5 times the average cost per pupil, which includes regular and special education. And it would probably be also good to look at, the administrative, because I think the all dis, or whatever it's called, if administrative costs are included or excluded in that, so that we really know what the all-in costs are for, for educating all of our kids, so.
Pretty expensive, when you take
Yeah.
the 3.5, I'll just take some ballpark figures. Say the average cost is $20,000 a kid. And if you have 700
And
kids
that's
that are,
average all-in,
so just to get the 3.5 point,
yeah.
you're going to be talking $49 million.
Right. But that 20,000 is the average cost of all students, which includes
Yeah.
the 83-ish% regular ed and 17-ish% special ed. So that's not that 20,000 isn't an all-in regular. It's not a regular ed cost.
No, it's a
That's an
average
all-in
cost per
cost.
pupil,
Oh,
yeah.
including special education students.
Right.
Yep.
Further questions? Yeah.
Just want to try to verify a point. I think I think I understand where it came from. The $32 million that are currently in the budget, was that a number that was established and requested by DOE, or was that a number that was came through finance?
I believe it came through finance. We don't request that amount.
So can you tell me what you actually requested, what DOE requested?
We don't request an amount for that one. They just give us that amount each year.
Okay, so that's totally on the will and pleasure of the finance committee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Dame,
Just a follow-up to Representative Woodcock's most recent questioning. So how similar or different is that 32 million over, say, the last 10 years? Has it changed?
Yes, because I've been around for a little bit. I've been around for like 23 years. And so, in the DOE, I'm much older than 23. Sorry. So they had at one point taken away $8 million and we were down to 23 million. And we were prorating like 70%. And so then I don't know, not us, someone brought it forward and they put more money in and brought it up to the 32 million. But I don't know how that all worked.
we're prorating in many subject areas. Career technical education is also prorated. I can remember at Lord 70%. And when you come to CTs, we're actually funding around 56%. And so this is across all the fields right now.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
So is the current 32 million the most that it has been?
Yes,
But if I understood what you said a
like
minute
3
ago.
years. I think maybe 3 years. It's been 32 million. And we one year we did 98%, but it's been 100% for 2 years.
So does that mean you're not prorating now?
No, not right now.
And we've come up, we were down really
When it was the 23 million,
70, 69, 68%.
right?
Going back 10 years ago, 8 years ago, that was when John Lynch was around. Yeah. So what we can do is, of course, we're going to have another meeting on this because it is a subcommittee. Come up with some kind of sense of direction or where we want to go with it. I suggest too, if you have a chance to talk with Mary, you talk to her about what she's doing. Because that's a critical component of trying to get some work done as far as funding things properly.
Are you sponsoring that?
Yep. Well, Mary put it out to me to, I said, yeah, I'll jump right on that. But I don't know who else she's talking to. I don't know. Anything else that we need from DOE right now? Yes, Representative Lekis.
Can you guys, sorry. If we're going to ask for this and we're gonna put some sort of carrot out there, can you make a ballpark estimate of what it would cost the schools to come up with the numbers we're asking for?
It would cost my time. Ultimately, it's going to take me away from a lot of my other obligations and duties. I'll do it. If the DOE tells me to do it, I'm certainly going to do it. I think I would have a step ahead of the game because I already have a lot of my numbers, but I'm not sure that everyone else does. But ultimately, it'd be a cost of time.
Okay, thank you.
It's a hard thing to find. Some of these districts, like the SAUs, the co-ops, how many directors do you have? And you have one director and then you have a whole lot of schools or towns which are receiving this money. So it's a lot of different budgets you're looking at. And I do know that having been in the school district as a principal administrator, this is a bad season to be putting out another request when you're just starting schools up and you're trying to get some of these things going smoothly. It's not an easy time. That's a reality factor. Well, thank you very much. You might if you see, you're not in the same building as Caitlin, right? Oh, you are back? You over there now? Congratulations. You might let her know we're looking for some information. Okay, is there anything else here we can do today? It is. It's okay. Not seeing any more discussion here. We'll adjourn this one and we'll come back. I don't know what we have for time here. I don't want to go anywhere until I've talked with Caitlin and find out what we're talking about and some of this spreadsheet stuff. We need to know that. And yeah, and I think we also have to really find out what are all the issues associated, the costs associated with special ed. In the school, you have special ed being taught in certain schools, all schools. There's equipment, there's supplies, there's space, there's administration, there's management, there's instruction.
That's just my concern the work. I understand the commission. I think it's on the what our next step is this one piece catastrophic. Was a bankrupt district. As the school said, the fault of the people involved are in different places. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we'll set a time and call the next meeting, put it in the calendar.
Yeah, combine it with some-
Pardon me?
combine it with some-
We've gone through this a million times before, and it's so complicated. I think Mary Heath has got it right.
Take my mind